Subscribe to our channel and press the bell icon so that you never miss any video lesson from Rao's IAS Study Circle.
All of you who are preparing for the civil service examination should understand the importance of essay paper and pay attention to this. First, this paper is of 250 marks and its weight is around 12.5% in your written plus interview score. This is a significant portion and hence you should prepare this very seriously. Second important aspect is average score of GS paper of the candidates who actually clear the examination hovers from around 95 to 105 marks. At the same time, average marks of essay for these people is around 130 plus. Toppers usually score 140 plus marks in this paper and take a lead over the competition. Third, essay paper develops on your foundation of general studies, your knowledge and understanding of various subjects, ability to present your ideas lucidly, covering a wide spectrum of interrelated ideas, and inherent skill for presenting your ideas in a systematic and powerful manner helps you in reaping more benefits from your general studies. In order to help you prepare for the essay paper in a systematic and gradual manner, Rao's IAS has started Mains Essay Test Series and QIP program. The first class of the session will be an open session that all of you can join. The session will take place on 12th of October at 10:30 am. There is a link in the description through which you can register yourself for the session. Attend the session and ensure a better chance for clearing the mains examination.
In our weekly series of mains question assignment from the DNS, the question for today's assignment is: what is multilateralism? Identify the major threats to multilateralism in the present time. This answer has to be written in 150 words and carries 10 marks. Now, this particular question has been framed from this particular discussion titled United Nations and the Retreat from Multilateralism. So, before attempting this particular question, you can go through the DNS dated 29 September 2020 to have a better understanding of this concept of multilateralism. So, please attempt such questions, as attempting such questions helps you to understand how to write all the important points with respect to a question in a limited time frame and also with respect to limited words. That is, this particular question with respect to multilateralism has to be written in 150 words. So go through this DNS dated 29 September 2020 presented by Nagendra sir, titled United Nations and the Retreat from Multilateralism, and then try to attempt this particular question. Hello and welcome to Daily News Simplified, an answer to what, why and how of newspaper reading from our UPSC perspective. Now today we shall discuss the important news which has appeared in the New Delhi edition of the Hindu newspaper dated 8th October 2020. The news to be discussed has been displayed on your screen and timestamping for the same has been provided in the description box below. So on this note, let's start our today's discussion from our examination point of view. The first news to be discussed appears on page number 1 and also as a continuation on page number 10. Now this news mentions about a Supreme Court judgment which says that public places cannot be occupied indefinitely. And this judgment is with respect to the protest at Shaheen Bagh. It says that blocking of road by Shaheen Bagh protesters unacceptable. Now here in this judgment, there are few things which becomes important from our examination perspective. First of all, this judgment is with respect to Article 19(1)(b). That is, all citizens shall have the right to assemble peacefully and without arms. However, this freedom has also certain reasonable restrictions under Article 19 Clause 3. So on one hand, all citizens have the right to assemble peacefully and without arms, and on the other hand, state can impose certain reasonable restrictions on certain grounds. Now these grounds are in the interest of sovereignty and integrity of India, public order, as well as reasonable restrictions. So these are the grounds on which state can impose reasonable restriction with respect to Article 19(1)(b). So overall, this judgment was with respect to right to protest at any place, vis-a-vis, or with respect to right to commute, since the protest at Shaheen Bagh took place on a road. So this judgment was delivered with respect to protesting at a public commutable road indefinitely. So in this regard, let us go through the important highlights of this particular judgment, which is very important with respect to UPSC syllabus. So with respect to the syllabus, in prelims it gets covered under Indian polity and governance as well as rights issues. In your mains, it gets covered under GS paper 2, especially with respect to important features of Indian constitution, that is Article 19 1b as well as Article 19 clause 3, and also functioning of the executive. So in this regard, let us go through the highlight of this very important judgment. The Supreme Court in its judgment emphasized on these 5 important points. Let us go through these 5 points to understand the viewpoint of the Supreme Court with respect to right to freedom of speech and expression along with right to freedom of protest as well as reasonable restrictions which a state can impose. So one of the most important observations of the Supreme Court was that Article 19 is the cornerstone of Indian Constitution and gives two treasured rights, that is Article 19(1)(a) as well as Article 19(1)(b). So here the court not only mentioned about the importance of Article 19(1)(b) but also mentioned about Article 19(1)(a), that is freedom of speech and expression, and mentioned these two rights as a treasured rights of the Indian Constitution. However, the Supreme Court also said that these rights also comes along with reasonable restrictions both under Article 19 clause 2 as well as under Article 19 clause 3. So the first point mentioned by the Supreme Court was that manner of dissent is different with respect to colonial times and with respect to present times in self-rule democracy. And dissent in both times cannot be equated. And it is in this regard the Supreme Court held that administration ought to take actions to keep area clear of encroachments, that is area of public commute clear of public encroachment. So here this particular aspect of the judgment becomes important, where the Supreme Court distinguishes the dissent which takes place in the present time as compared to the dissent which took place in the colonial times, that is in British India. So here the Supreme Court observed that the mode and manner of dissent against colonial rule cannot be equated with dissent in a self-rule democracy. However, the court also emphasized or focused on the fact that fundamental right of every citizen to assemble peacefully and protest against the actions or inactions of the state must be respected and encouraged. So this is one of the important aspects of the judgment. However, the other part of the judgment is that such kind of occupation of public ways with respect to protest, whether at site in question or anywhere else for protest, is not acceptable, and the administration ought to take action to keep areas clear of encroachments or obstructions. So on one hand, the Supreme Court mentions about the importance of Article 19(1)(a) and 19(1)(b), whereas on the other hand, the court also emphasizes on action which must be taken by the state in case of public encroachment in case of protest. So on this note, the second point highlighted here was with respect to right to protest versus right to commute. Now here the Supreme Court of India cited a very important case referred as Mazdoor Kisan Shakti Sangathan case, where the Supreme Court in this particular judgment held that each fundamental right, whether be it of individual or of a class or a group of citizens, does not exist in isolation and must be balanced with other rights. That is, right to protest cannot exist alone. If there are certain other rights of the citizens, then such other rights along with the right to protest must be balanced. So one of the important aspects highlighted here by the Supreme Court is with respect to balancing of important rights, including balancing of different fundamental rights. And it is here with respect to balancing of rights, the Supreme Court said that state is very much within its limits to impose reasonable restriction, especially if public order is disturbed. Based on this, the Supreme Court held that demonstration or protest by any group of citizens should be done at certain designated places alone. Now this is a very important part of this judgment because this allows the state or empowers the state the right or authority to quell protest from public places. So in a way, the Supreme Court held that yes, people have right to protest, but only at certain places which is designated by the government. So government can allot certain places which is not a public commutable place, and demonstration can take place only at such designated place by the government. Now this aspect of the judgment was given keeping in mind the statement of Walter Lippmann, who is also a Pulitzer Prize winner. He had said that in a democracy, the opposition is not only tolerated as constitutional, but must be maintained because it is indispensable. So, keeping these words in mind, the bench held that public ways and public spaces cannot be occupied in such manner that too indefinitely. So, here the entire focus of the Supreme Court judgment was to occupy a public commutable place indefinitely. Further, the court held that democracy and dissent goes hand in hand. But then, demonstrations expressing dissent have to be at designated places alone. And the present case, that is the case of Shaheen Bagh, was not even one of protest taking place in an undesignated area, but was of blockage of public way, that is public road, which caused grave inconvenience to commuters. So overall, the court held that it cannot allow an indeterminable number of people to assemble whenever they choose to protest. And with respect to balancing of rights, the court held that fundamental rights do not live in isolation. The right of the protester has to be balanced with the right of the commuter. They have to coexist in mutual respect. So both aspects of this judgment are significant with respect to right to assemble peacefully for protest at public places. And based on these concepts, the Supreme Court said that administration should not hide behind court orders and rather take appropriate measures to quell such protest. So, overall, the Supreme Court said that the kind of indefinite occupancy of public places is not acceptable and the administration ought to take action to keep the areas clear of encroachment or obstructions. So, in this regard, the court said that the manner which the administration adopts to remove such encroachment is their responsibility and they should not hide behind court orders or rather should not wait for court orders to carry out their administrative responsibilities. So, this again becomes an important aspect of the judgments. So, overall, the court said that the courts can adjudicate or decide upon the legality of actions and are not meant to give shoulders to the administration to fire their guns from. So basically, the court said that administration should take responsibility of their own action and should not wait for the court to give the final orders. And lastly, the Supreme Court observed about use of social media to gather protesters in recent times. So here the Supreme Court said that social media acts on both sides of the spectrum. On one side, it strengthens the movement, whereas on the other side, it also weakens the movement. So, in a balancing way, the Supreme Court held that social media must be used in a constructive way to come to a logical solution for any protest. That is, there must be a constructive outcome when social media is used to gather protesters at certain places. However, the Supreme Court also warned that social media can also be used to polarize an environment and disturb public order. So, it is in this regard the Supreme Court also gave its observation on use of social media to gather protesters. So, this judgment becomes important to understand that any kind of protest at a public commutable places cannot go on indefinitely. So, with this discussion, let's move on to our next news analysis. The next news to be discussed appears on page number 6. It says, Bodoland poll gets Assam cabinet nod. Now, you need to know about this news with respect to two aspects. First, you need to know about Bodoland Territorial Council as it has been constituted under 6th schedule of the Indian Constitution. And next, you need to know about the fact that it is the State Election Commission which announces schedule for Bodoland Territorial Council elections. So these two aspects becomes important with respect to this particular news. Number one, that Bodoland Territorial Council is constituted under the 6th schedule of the Indian Constitution. And second is the fact that elections to Bodoland Territorial Council is conducted by State Election Commission. Now, considering the nature of paper which has been asked by UPSC in the prelims of 2020, it's important to understand any given topic in a very comprehensive and a wholesome manner. So, in this regard, let us understand about the Bodoland Territorial Council, including the functions and powers of State Election Commission. So, the news highlights that the Cabinet of State Government of Assam has decided to request the State Election Commission to schedule the Bodoland Territorial Council elections in December. Now, the election was supposed to take place in April, but because of the COVID pandemic, the elections were postponed. So, in this regard, the news says that elections to the 40 seats in the council were to have been held on April 4th, but were deferred due to the COVID-19 pandemic. And the council has been since then under the governor's rule since its dissolution on 27th April 2020. Now, another important aspect highlighted in the news is that the Assam government has also decided to make Bodo the associate official language in the state of Assam. And this has been done by passing an ordinance by the state government. Now, here it's important to understand about Article 345, which mentions about official language or languages of a state. So, with respect to the heading of this particular article, it is very much clear that a state can have either one official language or more than one official languages. So, the article highlights that subject to the provisions of Article 346 and 347, the legislature of a state may by law adopt any one or more of the languages in use in the state or Hindi as language or languages to be used for all or any of the official purposes of the state. So the state government of Assam has decided to make Bodo the official language of Assam along with other official languages. Now, before understanding about Bodoland Territorial Council, let us go through some of the basics with respect to the 6th schedule to the Indian Constitution. Now, it says provisions to the administration of tribal areas in the states of Assam, Meghalaya, Tripura and Mizoram. So the 6th schedule provides for administration of tribal areas in the states of Assam, Meghalaya, Tripura as well as Mizoram. Now, the 6th schedule provides for constitution of district council as well as regional councils. So these two councils becomes important with respect to the administration of tribal areas. And both these councils, that is district council as well as regional councils, have been vested with administrative powers. So paragraph 2 of 6th schedule says that there shall be a district council for each autonomous district consisting of not more than 30 members. Next, it says that there shall also be a separate regional council for each area constituted as an autonomous region. So for an autonomous region there are regional councils and for autonomous districts there are district council. Now, another important highlight is that subject to the provisions of this schedule, that is subject to some of other provisions as well, the administration of an autonomous district shall be vested in the district council for such district, as well as administration of an autonomous region shall be vested in the regional council for such region. So this is what we have seen just now. Now, however, there are certain areas with respect to overlap. For example, there can be certain areas of district council which could be overlapped with areas of regional council. So for such overlapping area in a district council, this 6th schedule says that in an autonomous district with regional councils, the district council shall have only such powers with respect to the areas under the authority of the regional council as may be delegated to it by the regional council. So suppose, for example, these are the overlapping area between district council and regional council, and the regional council says that this area shall be administered by the regional council and allows the area shaded in red to be administered by district council. So this is what this particular provision mentions about overlapping area with respect to district council and regional council. So ultimately it will be the decision of the regional council to ensure which areas in the overlapping area shall be administered by the district council. Now, if we go through this paragraph 2 very carefully of the 6th schedule, it mentions here point 1, as you can see. Now, this point 1 is with respect to certain amendment, and this amendment was carried out in the year 2003. So, in the constitution, it highlights that the paragraph 2 has been amended in its application to the state of Assam by the 6th schedule to the Constitution Amendment Act 2003. Now, this amendment provides for certain important facts. First and foremost, it mentions that district council constituted for the Bodoland Territorial Areas district shall be called the Bodoland Territorial Council. So this becomes very important before going into or before understanding about various aspects of Bodoland Territorial Council. So it says that the district council constituted for the Bodoland Territorial Areas district shall be called the Bodoland Territorial Council. And it is in this regard it highlights that provided that the Bodoland Territorial Council shall consist of not more than 46 members, of whom 40 shall be elected on the basis of adult suffrage. So 40 members of the Bodoland Territorial Council shall be elected members. Now, with respect to these 40 elected members, certain seats are also reserved for certain categories. where it says that of whom 30 shall be reserved for the scheduled tribes. So of these 40, 30 shall be reserved for scheduled tribes. 5 seats shall be reserved for non-tribal communities, whereas another 5 seats shall be open for all communities. So another 5 seats open for all categories or all communities. And the remaining 6 members shall be nominated by the governor. So of the 46 members, 40 shall be elected and 6 shall be nominated by the governor. So this is something very important with respect to Bodoland Territorial Council. So after understanding these aspects, let us understand in detail about Bodoland Territorial Council. So it is in this regard that this news becomes important both from the perspective of our prelims examination as well as mains with respect to polity and governance. So as already stated that Bodoland Territorial Council has been constituted under 6th schedule of the Indian Constitution, and it was done in the year 2003 after signing a memorandum of settlement in February 2003. Now this memorandum of settlement was agreed or signed between Government of India, Government of Assam as well as Bodo Liberation Tigers. And this memorandum of settlement in a way fulfilled the economic, educational as well as linguistic aspirations of the people of Bodoland. So these three aspects also becomes important, that the memorandum of settlement helped in fulfilling the aspirations with respect to economic aspiration, educational aspiration as well as linguistic aspiration of the people and the communities residing in the Bodoland area. Further, this settlement also helped with respect to preservation of land rights, socio-cultural and ethnic identity of the Bodos, and also to speed up infrastructural development in the BTC area or Bodoland Territorial Council area. So all these aspects becomes important from our examination perspective, and you need to know in detail about the Bodoland Territorial Council. So the whole focus of signing of this memorandum of settlement in 2003 was not only with respect to development of the Bodo people but also with respect to overall development of the region. So in this regard it says that the council aims at bringing about accelerated progress to one of the most backward regions of the state of Assam, with special focus on development of the Bodo people in the field of education, preservation of land rights, linguistic aspiration, as well as with respect to preserving their culture and their ethnic identity. So overall, this settlement has not only preserved the cultural as well as linguistic identity of the people residing in the area, but has also helped in the development of this particular region. And this development, especially with respect to economic infrastructure of the area, has taken place irrespective of people's caste, creed, and religion living in this particular part of the country. Now, some of the communities which are residing in the Bodoland Territorial Council area are Bodos, Assamese, Bengalis, Koch Rajbangshis, Rabhas, Garos, Adivasis, Muslims, Nepalis, etc. Now, with respect to powers and functions of the Bodoland Territorial Council, it says that powers in respect to subjects transferred. Now, it highlights that the council has legislative powers in respect of certain subjects which has been transferred to it. And it says that as enumerated below. So these are the subjects which have been transferred to the Bodoland Territorial Council. So the Bodoland Territorial Council can make legislations with respect to, as you can see, agriculture, animal husbandry and veterinary, fisheries, market and fairs, panchayats and rural development, water resources, handloom and textile, roads and bridges, dairy development, soil conservation, forestry and wildlife, irrigation, small scale industry, sericulture, roads and bridges, tribal research institute, tourism, food and civil supplies, economics and statistics, legal meteorology, education, art and culture, sports and youth welfare, lottery, library services, museum and archaeology, health and family welfare services, water supply and sanitation, social welfare and nutrition, registration of birth and death, labor and employment including industrial training institutes, urban development, information and public relation, water supply and sanitation, etc. So you can go through all these important highlights on the official website of Bodoland Territorial Council of Assam. Now, important point here is that it says that the Bodoland Territorial Council also have executive, administrative and financial powers. So these powers again becomes significant with respect to powers and functions of Bodoland Territorial Council, as they have executive powers, administrative powers, as well as financial powers in respect of subjects transferred to it. So, with respect to all these subjects, the Bodoland Territorial Council has executive, administrative, as well as financial powers. Now, there is also an executive council of the Bodoland Territorial Council. It says that this executive council comprised of not more than 14 executive members, one of whom shall be the chief and another shall be the deputy chief of the executive council. Further, it highlights that there shall be adequate representation of the non-tribal members in the executive council. Now, this is a very important aspect highlighted here. The fact that this executive council of Bodoland Territorial Council shall also be adequately represented by a non-tribal members. Further, it says that both the chief and the deputy chief of this council shall have the status equivalent to cabinet minister and other executive members equivalent to Minister of State of Assam for the protocol purposes in the Bodoland Territorial Council area. Now, just like other state legislative assembly, the Bodoland Territorial Council Legislative Assembly shall also comprise of speaker as well as deputy speaker. Now, another important aspect which you must know is that the Bodoland Territorial Council prepares two sets of budgets. One is entrusted budget, which is basically with respect to the salary as well as developmental works within the area, and second is the normal budget pertaining mainly to establishment, expenditure and revenue receipts of the council itself, which is placed in the Council Legislative Assembly for approval. Now, the entrusted budget, particularly for development activities, also referred as SOPD, that is State on Priority Development, is also placed in the Council Legislative Assembly for discussion and approval. So, with respect to the preparation of budget, you should know that the Bodoland Territorial Council prepares two sets of budget, that is entrusted budget and normal budget. So, with this we complete first part of the discussion with respect to sixth schedule and also about Bodoland Territorial Council. Next, let us understand certain basics with respect to State Election Commission as provided under Indian Constitution. Now, with respect to State Election Commission, we need to know about Article 243K as well as Article 243ZA of the Indian Constitution. Now here, Article 243ZA says that the superintendent's direction and control of the preparation of electoral rolls for and conduct of all elections to municipalities shall be vested in the State Election Commission referred to in Article 243K. That is referred here. So Article 243K says about superintendent's direction and control of the preparation of electoral rolls for and conduct of all elections to the panchayat shall be vested in the State Election Commission and shall consist of a State Election Commissioner to be appointed by the Governor. So the State Election Commissioner shall be appointed by the Governor. Now it further says that subject to the provisions of any law made by the legislature of a state, the conditions of service and tenure of office of the State Election Commissioner shall be such as the Governor may by rule determine. So the conditions of service as well as tenure of office of State Election Commissioner shall be as such Governor may by rule determine with respect to a particular state. However, the State Election Commissioner shall not be removed from his office except in like manner and on the like grounds as a judge of a high court, and the conditions of service of the State Election Commissioner shall not be varied to their disadvantage after their appointment. So once a rule has been made by the state government with respect to conditions of service and tenure of office of State Election Commissioner, then after making of such rule, such rules cannot be tampered with, and the State Election Commissioner can only be removed from his office in like manner and on like grounds as a judge of a high court. So Article 271B provides for removal of judge of a high court, and Article 124 Clause 4 provides for removal of a judge of a Supreme Court. Article 217 says that a judge of a high court may be removed from his office by the President in the manner provided in Clause 4 of Article 124 for the removal of judge of a Supreme Court. So basically, judge of a high court is removed in the same manner as that of a judge of a Supreme Court. Please remember this aspect. And with respect to removal of a judge of a Supreme Court, Article 124 Clause 4 says a judge of a Supreme Court shall not be removed from his office except by an order of the President passed after an address by each House of the Parliament, supported by a majority of the total membership of that House and by a majority of not less than 2/3 of the members of that House present and voting. has been presented to the President in the same session for such removal on the grounds of proved misbehavior or incapacity. So again, both these provisions with respect to removal of judges of High Court as well as that of Supreme Court becomes very important from our examination perspective, as questioned by UPSC in the prelims of 2019 has already been asked. So this was the question asked by UPSC in the prelims of 2019. The question was, consider the following statements. First, the motion to impeach a judge of Supreme Court of India cannot be rejected by the Speaker of Lok Sabha as per Judges Inquiry Act. No, it can be rejected by the Speaker of the Lok Sabha or even Chairman of Raj Sabha. Second, the Constitution of India defines and gives details of what constitutes incapacity and proved misbehavior of the judges of the Supreme Court of India. Now we have seen the provision Article 124 Clause 4 which only mentions about the point of proved misbehavior or incapacity and does not define it. So in this regard, the second statement also becomes incorrect as the Constitution of India does not define it. Third, the details of the process of impeachment of the judges of Supreme Court of India are given in Judges Inquiry Act of 1968. Yes, this is correct. Fourth, if the motion for the impeachment of a judge is taken up for voting, the law requires the motion to be backed by each house of the parliament and supported by a majority of total membership of that house and by not less than two-thirds of the total members of that house present and voting. Now this is the exact provision as has been provided here. So in this regard, the statement also becomes correct. So the question was, which of the statements given above are correct? So the correct answer was C, that is 3 and 4 only. So we understand that this particular topic is extremely important from various aspects with respect to features of Indian Constitution. So after understanding this very important topic from the perspective of polity and governance, let us move to the next topic of discussion. The next news to be discussed appears as an editorial on page number 8 and also on page number 12 with respect to international news. Now the editorial says 4 for 1. Now 4 here refers to Quad. Whatever the benefits of Quad, India should not be led by United States on regional initiatives. So overall this editorial highlights that yes, Quad had certain benefits for India. However, India should not be drawn into the idea with respect to Quad which US sees, as United States wants to see Quad or wants to convert Quad into a military alliance. And Ministry of External Affairs have categorically stated that they do not believe in any alliance system, rather they believe in strategic autonomy of India. So in this regard, let us go through both these news with respect to the development of Quad. Now Mr. Mike Pompeo of United States has said that it was critical for the Quad partners, that is United States, India, Australia and Japan, to collaborate to protect our people and partners from CCP, that is Communist Party of China, with respect to China's exploitation, corruption and coercion in various geographies including India. Another official from the United States highlighted that we also have to frame the problem correctly. This isn't about US-China dispute alone. Rather, this is about free world versus Chinese authoritarianism. So United States wants to project Quad as a coalition of democracies, that too against Chinese authoritarianism as well as against free market. So based on these ideas, let us go through the important highlights which has been provided in both these news. Now from our examination perspective, this topic gets covered under GS paper 2 in our mains examination, especially with respect to international relations. So this editorial says that Quad has now reached into a decisive phase, as earlier the meetings of Quad were not made public, and for the first time important aspects of Quad meetings has been made public. Now another important aspect is that Quad is also supported by the new Prime Minister of Japan, who is Yoshihide Suga. So in this regard, Quad has also gained legitimacy not only among themselves, but they've also made important aspects of the meetings public. These important aspects include meeting of finance ministers of Quad annually, cooperation on combating pandemic, that is COVID-19 as of now, and building infrastructure, connectivity as well as supply chain, so that the Quad members do not have to depend solely on China. Now in this regard, this editorial says that eagerness has been shown by all the 4 members to cooperate, especially United States, as United States wants Quad also as a military alliance. Now, the four members of Quad, that is India, United States, Japan, and Australia, are very much clear with respect to certain aspects of Quad. That is, they want to make Quad a coalition to counter China's aggression. They see Quad as a collaboration to protect the region from China's exploitation, corruption, and coercion, especially with respect to LAC standoff with India, and also with respect to aggression of China in the South and East China Sea. Further, the four members see this coalition of Quad as coalition of democracies, which is committed to free and open Indo-Pacific region, and which also believes in free market economy. However, the problem is that United States want Quad to become a military alliance. As already mentioned, that India is not very much supportive of this idea because India believes in strategic autonomy and does not want to be guided or navigated by United States in matters of international relations. So, despite the benefits of Quad, still there are certain problems for India, especially with respect to the Quad. These are the aspect of strategic autonomy which India believes in. Next, India does not want navigation or guidance on Quad from the United States. Now, another important point is that elections in United States in November and December will be a major deciding factor because it will decide which particular party will come into power. And based on a particular party coming into power, there might be certain changes with respect to understanding of the entire Indo-Pacific region, also with respect to Quad. And another problem for India is that as of now, it does not want to wade into the South China Sea. So these can be said to be some of the problems for India with respect to Quad. However, the most important point is that for the first time, important aspects of Quad meetings have been made public, especially with respect to annual meeting of finance ministers of Quad, cooperation on combating the pandemic, and also building infrastructure, connectivity, as well as supply chain. Thus, this news becomes important with respect to international relations. With this, let's move on to our next news discussion. The next news to be discussed appears on page number 12. The news highlights that India and Japan finalized the text of Pact for Artificial Intelligence as well as 5G, the cyber security agreement to promote cooperation between India and Japan. Now, this news is with respect to India and Japan 13th Foreign Ministers Strategic Dialogue. Now, this slide has been taken from the Ministry of External Affairs. It says that External Affairs Minister Dr. S. Jaishankar held the 13th India-Japan Foreign Minister Strategic Dialogue with his Japanese counterpart. So, considering the 13th India-Japan Foreign Minister Strategic Dialogue, let us go through the important highlights which has been provided on Ministry of External Affairs with respect to the strategic dialogue. Now, this strategic dialogue becomes important with respect to current events of international importance with respect to our prelims examination, and in the mains gets covered under GS paper 2, especially with respect to international relations, specifically under bilateral relations. So both India and Japan have reaffirmed their mutual trust as well as shared values. And considering their special strategic and global partnership, they also discussed about various areas of convergence, which includes maritime security, trade and investment, manufacturing, skill development, connectivity and infrastructure, health and wellness, as well as Indo-Pacific Ocean Initiative and United Nations reforms. Now, Indo-Pacific Ocean Initiative was announced by Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi at the 14th East Asia Summit in Bangkok. Now, the aim of Indo-Pacific Oceans Initiative is to provide for safe, secure and stable maritime domain, especially in the Indo-Pacific region. So the focus point of Indo-Pacific Oceans Initiative includes creating partnerships among interested states in enhancing maritime security, sustainably using marine resources, disaster prevention as well as disaster management. Now, apart from this, both India and Japan also recognize the increasing role being played by digital technologies. And in this regard, both India and Japan highlighted the need for robust and resilient digital and cyber system. And in this regard, both these countries welcomed the finalization of the text of the Cyber Security Agreement. Now, this agreement promotes cooperation in capacity building, research and development, security and resilience in the areas of critical information infrastructure, 5G Internet of Things, artificial intelligence, etc. Moving further, both India and Japan also exchanged views on regional and global issues of mutual interest. Further, both also emphasized the need for a free, open, and inclusive Indo Pacific region and highlighted that it must be premised on diversified and resilient supply chains. And it is in this context both the countries welcomed the supply chain resilience initiative between India, Japan, and Australia, and also with respect to like minded countries. Now, India, Japan, and Australia are very much reliant or dependent on China, especially with respect to supply chain management. So, it is here where Japan has proposed supply chain resilience initiative so that these three countries do not have to only depend on China and rather create their own supply chain initiative. So, it is in this regard this supply chain resilience initiative becomes important between India, Japan, and Australia, and it is also open for other like minded countries. Further, it says that the two ministers of India and Japan concurred that the Indo Pacific region has acquired greater salience in recent times and agreed that both India and Japan needs to work together for the benefit of the entire Indo Pacific region. Further, in this regard, both India and Japan reaffirmed their similarities with respect to how they see or how they view the entire Indo Pacific region as. And in this regard, both agreed that their visions for Indo Pacific vision is based on rule of law, respect for sovereignty, as well as territorial integrity. So these are the three aspects which both India and Japan believes in, that is rule of law, respect for sovereignty, and territorial integrity. And lastly, Japan also agreed to become the lead partner in the connectivity pillar of Indo-Pacific Oceans Initiative of Prime Minister Narendra Modi, so as to jointly take both countries' respective visions for the Indo-Pacific region forward. So these are some of the important highlights of 13th India-Japan Foreign Ministers Strategic Dialogue. Now this strategic dialogue becomes important both from the perspective of mains as well as prelims examination. With this, let's move on to our next news discussion. Now, the next news to be discussed appears as an article on page number 9. It says, Gig work and its skewed terms. The new labor codes do little to provide better pay and definitive rights to platform workers. So overall, this article highlights about certain concerns and challenges, especially with respect to workers of the gig economy or the informal economy, which is presently available in the labor codes. Now we all know that the government of India has provided for 4 labor codes by amalgamating different labor laws. So these 4 labor codes are Labor Code on Wages, Labor Code on Industrial Relations, Labor Code on Social Security and Welfare, and Labor Code on Occupational Safety, Health and Working Conditions. So based on this, let us understand about the gig economy and also certain challenges which the workers in the gig economy faces, especially because of lack of social security measures as provided in the labor codes. So, with respect to gig economy, it highlights that it refers to a form of economy in which organizations employ contractual, non permanent employees instead of a permanent employees, as it gives more leverage to the organizations with respect to either hiring them or firing such employees of the gig economy. So, in this regard, it highlights that the gig economy workers range across the spectrum of professions from highly paid to below minimum wage. So, with respect to band of income, there is no particular limit. Employers of gig economy are present across pay spectrum, and this trend is very strong in advanced economies like United States, where a large number of firms hire contractual workers on a short-term basis. So, in this regard, this news says that with rapid adoption of technology, this trend of gig economy or hiring employee as a non-permanent employee or on a contractual basis is slowly gaining trend in India. So according to a recent estimate, about 13 lakh Indians have joined the gig economy in the last half of 2018 to 19, and this amounts to a 30% growth compared to the first half of the financial year. Now, it was estimated that around 21 lakh jobs were created in the metros, and out of 21 lakh jobs, 14 lakh jobs were created in the gig economy. And with respect to gig economy, food and e-commerce companies would account for the major share of job creation in the gig economy. So this is with respect to the gig economy in India. So the news highlights about two aspects. First is with respect to reasons for the development of gig economy, and second with respect to protection provided to gig workers under the labor codes. Now the reasons for the growth of gig economy includes rapid growth of digital communication, which requires highly mobile workforce, and also where work can be done from anywhere without any geographical barriers. So in such situation or for such criteria, employers prefer non-permanent employees or employees are provided contractual jobs. Further, it says that adoption of gig economy reduces operating cost of firms as companies would not be liable to pay pension and other social security benefits. Obviously, if an organization hire a person on a contractual nature of job, then they do not have to pay for social security such as provident fund or other social security like insurance, etc. It's not only that only organizations favor gig workers. Even the workers themselves at times prefer such kind of job. So, for the workers, flexibility at times becomes more important. So, for such workers for whom flexibility in work is important, they also prefer to work in the gig economy. So, it says that flexibility to the workers wherein they can switch jobs frequently and choose work which suits their area of interest. So, these kinds of workers also prefer gig economy. Another reason for the development of gig economy is that recent slowdown in the formal employment creation has also boosted the development of gig economy. So these are some of the reasons for the development of gig economy in India. Now the next point highlighted is with respect to protection provided to gig workers under the labor codes. Now one good thing about labor code is that it has legally acknowledged the presence of gig workers in the economy. For example, Code on Social Security 2020 provides for registration of all gig workers. It also calls upon central and state governments to formulate schemes to ensure social security benefits such as insurance for gig workers. Further, the Social Security Code also empowers the government to set up social security funds for their benefits, and the contribution to these funds may be funded from contributions of center, states, or even aggregator platforms such as Uber, Zomato, etc. So, this means that aggregator platforms such as Uber or Zomato have to provide to their employee certain social security benefits or certain fund as a part of social security fund. However, this aspect is not compulsory, and it is here where the concerns lie. So in this regard, there are three important concerns which have been raised by this author. First is that there is no guaranteed benefits. Third is that there is no guaranteed contribution by aggregator platforms. And third, no legal rights for gig workers. Now, with respect to former employment, such workers are automatically guaranteed certain social security benefits such as provident funds, insurance, maternity benefits, etc. However, these benefits are not automatically extended to gig workers or workers in the gig economy. So, in this regard, the author says that central and state governments are required to come up with schemes to provide these benefits to employees of the gig workers or employees of the gig economy. So the news says that social security benefits for gig workers depend upon political will of the government. So in this regard, the government needs to come up with certain concrete schemes to provide for social security benefits for workers in the gig economy. Next point highlighted is that no guaranteed contribution by aggregator platforms. Now here the author says that Code on Social Security mandates industries employing workers above a certain threshold level to compulsorily contribute towards social security benefits such as provident fund, insurance, maternity benefit, etc. However, these social security benefits given to permanent employees are not provided to gig workers. So the news highlight that as far as gig workers is concerned, the language in the code does not provide for compulsory contribution by the aggregator platforms. That is, it is not mandatory for the aggregator platforms to transfer social security benefits to its employees. It is in this regard, it is left open to the government whether to seek contribution from the aggregator platforms or not. So the article says that the government should come up with a scheme whereby it enforces the aggregator platforms to transfer social security benefits to its employees. And lastly, the third point mentions that there is no legal right for gig workers. It says that industrial workers are given legal rights over the various aspects of work such as payment of minimum wages, safe working conditions, right to strike, right to form trade unions, etc. However, such rights have not been recognized and provided in case of gig workers. So these are some of the concerns highlighted by the article with respect to workers or employees working in the gig economy. Now this topic of gig economy becomes important both from our prelims and mains examination perspective. In our prelims gets covered under economic and social development, and in mains gets covered under GS paper 2 as well as GS paper 3. In GS paper 3, it gets covered under Indian economy and inclusive growth, whereas in GS paper 2, it gets covered under welfare schemes for the vulnerable sections of the population, including laws. Thus, this article becomes important to understand the challenges and concerns with respect to workers or employees in the gig economy. Now, based on that discussion, the question for the day is, consider the following statements. First, Bodoland Territorial Council has been constituted under 5th schedule to the Indian Constitution. Second, all members of Bodoland Territorial Council are elected on the basis of adult suffrage. So the question is, which of the statements given above are incorrect? Options are A, 1 only, B, 2 only, C, both 1 and 2, and D, neither 1 nor 2. Now, coming to the answer of yesterday, the question was Sagittarius A star recently in news is options were A, neutron star, B, supernova, C, quasar, and D, none of the above. Here, the correct answer is D, because as per the image from NASA, Sagittarius A is a supermassive black hole. So, with this, we come to an end to today's discussion. Thank you.